Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Marquette University Law School. I'm Mike Goucher. This is On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations with news and policy makers, people we say are doing important, interesting work in this region and beyond. Today we're joined for what we think will be a very interesting conversation on county government, the role of the Milwaukee County Board. And we are joined by Representative Joe Sanfilippo, who is a Republican from West Allis, a former Milwaukee County Board member. He's also the man who has sponsored a piece of legislation that I think it's fair to say has been a bit controversial. Just a little bit, yeah. And it attempts to, as Representative Sanfilippo will explain, in some respects change the way the Milwaukee County Board does business. Also joining us today is the chairwoman of the board, Marina Dimitrievich. I think it's also safe to say she probably doesn't necessarily agree with this proposal for reform. But first of all, let's give them a warm welcome to Marquette University Law School. A couple of things about the format today. Those of you who come to our events on a regular basis will notice this format is a bit different. This is an event co-sponsored by the law school and by the Milwaukee Press Club. We're delighted about that. So today we'll have three journalists. I'll be asking questions. Steve Schultz, who covers county government for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, will be asking questions, as will Steve Jagler, who is the executive editor of Biz Times Milwaukee. Our backs, unfortunately, will be to you, although I'm told that is the best side for journalists. And anyhow, so we'll be asking questions, and this will be what we hope is a candid, unscripted conversation. There may be some follow-ups from the journalists. There may be an opportunity for the chairwoman and the representative to talk amongst themselves. So we think it'll be a very, very interesting day, and we are so glad that you're here to spend it with us. I'm going to introduce Steve Jagler because we just have a couple of housekeeping details before we begin. So Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Mike. And I just need to get the proper thank yous out at the start. I want to thank Marquette University and yourself for working with the Press Club to execute this newsmaker luncheon, and we're thrilled to partner with you folks. I need to thank Journal Communications and the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel because without their support, our newsmaker luncheons could not happen. And I want to thank our newsmakers for being here. It's an important conversation to have, and I'll kick off the questioning, I guess. You know, in trying to get my grips around this issue, in trying to follow it as closely as I can, it almost seems like a three-level game of chess going on with different factions, the county board, the state legislature, the county executive, and different factions within those factions. So I wonder, Representative Sanfilippo, let's go right to the issue of local control. How do you make the case that the future of the governance of the people in the Milwaukee County, how should that be dictated by an agenda coming out of Madison, regardless of what that agenda is? And I wonder if you could make the case for justifying that. And Marina, I wonder if you could then respond to what his argument is.
Thank you very much. And first, let me say thank you to you for hosting us here, and thank you all for coming. This is an important issue. Really what this bill does in regards to local control is it enhances local control for Milwaukee County voters. And I'll tell you why. The rest of the state has, in state statutes, they have a provision that's known as petition and referendum. So every single county resident in this state that does not live in Milwaukee County, if they're not happy with the control or the way their county board is acting, they have the power right now in their hands to effectuate some type of change. They can hold a petition drive, and they can demand a force a binding referendum onto the on the ballot. Now, that is a little different. This isn't exactly what we're doing here because we're talking about changing to part-time. That deals with size of the board. But nonetheless, Milwaukee County is prevented in state statute from the citizens are prevented from being able to take that control in their own hands like every other county resident has. So this bill is going to give the citizens of Milwaukee County that same opportunity that every citizen in the state has that says, you know what, we want to make some change on our county board. We, the citizens, are going to be able to do that now. In the end, the governance change that the citizens are going to experience if this bill passes and if the referendum passes, That level of representation that citizens receive, and that's the part of this bill that most directly affects the citizens, is their local control. That's not going to change unless the citizens of Milwaukee County say we want it to change. So we're not dictating that from Madison. All we're doing is providing the opportunity for the citizens to have that say. And I tried to do that when I was on the board last year with a non-binding referendum. I just wanted a county-wide non-binding referendum so that we could gauge the level of support. Was it there or wasn't it there? We could get it on the entire ballot. I didn't have the support on the board to get a county-wide referendum, but we got it on 12 out of 19 municipalities. And the question passed by over 80% in those 12 municipalities. And that, again, is a good range because you've had some of the most conservative suburban communities along with some of the most liberal suburban communities. And in every single suburban community, that measure passed. So we know that the appetite is there for reform. So this bill is just giving everybody in Milwaukee County the opportunity to have that vote.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here at Marquette. I'm a Marquette grad, so it feels like I'm just here at home. So I'm happy to be here. I'm going to start from the end of Representative Sanfilippo's comments on the referendum that was on the ballot last year. First of all, the question that was on that ballot in about 25% of the population of Milwaukee County is not the question that is being proposed in Joe Sanfilippo's bill. And again, as I point out, while it did pass in some areas with a high margin, it was not on the ballot in nearly 75 to 80% of the residents who voted on that in Milwaukee County. That's number one. On the local control issue, I don't believe that Representative Sanfilippo has made a strong enough argument as to why the state has to do this, or essentially why Milwaukee County government cannot do it on its own. We have had hundreds of residents of Milwaukee County come to our hearings, our Milwaukee County Initiative hearings, saying one thing all in common. They don't know exactly what kind of reform that they want, but they definitely want it to be here done locally rather than at the state. And that was in some suburban communities. Why we had to have hearings in Milwaukee County? Because at this point, the state legislature, at least the assembly, has refused to have a hearing on this bill in Milwaukee County. So I don't think that that's showing an appetite for listening locally. The last point I'd like to make on local control, the bill says at the same time of this, where they pick the language of this referendum, they're choosing the language, putting it on the ballot locally, and it's a binding referendum. At the same time, they're not allowing Milwaukee County government, like other governments, have the ability to put any other referendum on to listen to our constituents on any other matter. And my last point on that, why it is not local control, is the rest of the bill that the representative did not speak about, the cuts to the legislative branch and the high consolidation of power in the county executive's branch is not going to the voters. You will never have a chance to vote on all those other parts of the bill, just on the median household income, if that should be the compensation of the supervisors. And so I think my question would be, why not put the rest of that bill on the ballot to the voters if this truly is local control?
Can I just give a quick rebuttal to that?
Why don't you address her last point there about why not put all of it on the...
Sure. I would like to remind everyone, though, that the county residents would have had the opportunity to vote if the board wouldn't have prevented them from last year. It's the only reason that only 25% of the people in Milwaukee County were able to voice their opinion is because the board prevented them from having that opportunity. So again, this bill is not forcing a change on the governance structure in Milwaukee County. All we're doing is giving people the opportunity to have that vote, something I tried to do from the board level but couldn't get it done. As far as the rest of the question is why it's not on the ballot. A lot of the problems that we have with county government, you can't blame on the county board or the county executive. Some of the blame has to go to the state legislature. And I don't mean me, of course, because I wasn't there in 1960. But what happened was in 1960, when the state created the role of county executive, up until that point, county boards ran every bit of county government. I mean, that's where the term supervisor came from. You're going to supervise state programs on a local basis. Around 1960, the state legislature decided, you know what? it's getting kind of confusing having too many people calling all the shots, so they recognized the importance of having one person be like the point man to call all the shots in county government. So the state created the role of county executive, and when they created the county executive role, it was very clear that their intent was the county executive was going to run the day-to-day operations of county government. He was the point person. He or she was the point person. So then the state, what happened though is they kind of left the job half finished, because when they created the role of exec, they gave the exec powers. They never really took the powers that up until that point the county board was exercising themselves. They never really took those powers away or clearly defined them. Now, in the first 15 to 20 years as the county board operated with a county executive, they worked fine. There weren't any problems. So we look back, well, what was that? It was a part-time board. And I think really the legislative intent was fresh in everybody's mind that, the board sets policy, they write the budget, they conduct oversight, but the county exec does the administration. They went one step farther then and said to the other counties, while the state mandated the county exec for Milwaukee County, they gave other counties a few years later the option to have a county executive. If they don't have a county executive, they have to have a county administrator. And then a few years after that, recognizing further the need for more one-person control, they came up with the legislative coordinator, the administrative coordinator. So I think it's clear that, the intent was that one person calls the rules. Now, why we don't put all of that on the ballot is because we're dealing with clearing up state statutes that were not properly written in the first place that are causing all this confusion. Nobody can fix state statutes other than the state legislature. So we're really cleaning up a mess that we've created by not having clear statutes, and then we're providing the opportunity for the people to vote on their representation.
May I respond
I think,
very
in
quickly?
fairness, before we get to Steve's question, yeah.
I can? Okay.
Absolutely.
Two things. I feel like the representative has said a few times that he wants to go back to 1959. I don't know about you, but I want Milwaukee County to move forward, not go back. And when you look at the compensation that those over 25 supervisors had received back then, we just had an article in the Journal Sentinel that mentioned that actually, with inflationary costs, the current county board is being paid less than it was back then. That's one point. The last thing I'll say on these issues and why those things are not on the referendum, I think we all need to ask ourselves, who's asking for those? Who's asking for the changes of the transfer of authority from the board of the executive and additional executive powers in Milwaukee County? It surely hasn't been in the meetings where there's been hundreds of residents that I've spoke to. I haven't heard anyone ask for that. Thank you.
I'd like to get back to a really basic question, and it's directed more to Representative Sanfilippo, since it's your bill. It's essentially this: what was the problem or the set of problems that motivated you to offer this legislation? In the memo that was circulated with your bill for co-sponsors, you talked about significant fiscal and structural problems that hinder job growth in Milwaukee County as kind of the primary reason. So I guess the question is, how do these structural changes get you to fix these problems?
Sure. I think that everybody can agree that in order to have a thriving, strong economy, a well-run, efficient, and effective government plays a key part in that. And so we've seen, I think, over the course of time, the fact that we don't have things running as smoothly as they could be at the county level, that it's kind of hampered some development. I mean, if you take a look, we have the Park East Freeway land. Everybody knows where that is. We just came off of the heels of the single biggest building boom time downtown Milwaukee has ever seen. I mean, everybody remembers what happened last decade. You couldn't go a block without stumbling over a construction barrel. But that land is still empty today, the vast majority of it. Well, why is that? It's because there's such a cumbersome process for a developer to go through to work with the county in order to be able to do a project that most developers aren't willing, and the project becomes unfeasible from a profitability standpoint to do that. So what I'm saying is we're going to take back, by making government run more efficient and more effectively, we're going to help prosper economic growth and development. Now, why I think these plans are needed, or these changes are needed at the state level, is because when I was on the board, I spent my time on the board trying to effectuate those changes from within. every step of the way I was hampered by the board. The board just plain and simple didn't want to talk about it. They weren't interested in reform. More importantly, the state audit, the State Audit Bureau in 2002, the Legislative Audit Bureau conducted a report on Milwaukee County. This was on the heels of the pension scandal. Everybody remembers that, unfortunately, as well, too. That Legislative Audit Bureau points to the problems that they pointed out there and the recommendations they made for change there. 99% of those changes were never enacted. So we've seen now the county government has had the opportunity over the last decade to make some changes. They hadn't done it. And some of the changes that they've recommended in that report back then are in my bill today. You know, for example, contract review. In 2002, the Legislative Audit Bureau said the county board should switch to a passive review process for establishing contracts. County board never did that. That's in my bill, passive review. So, you know, I think we've seen over the time there's been a resistance from the board to make this change on their own. We know that it wants to happen. We know that the citizens want it to happen based on the referendum we had last year, and we're just going to step forward now and allow those changes to happen.
Okay. Thank you. Well, a couple of things. I don't believe that the representative responded to the fiscal and structural problems that are said in the co-sponsorship memo. Yes, Milwaukee County, as a local government, like many local governments in the state of Wisconsin, faces fiscal challenges. We do, however, have a AA+ bond rating, and we just went out and we received at a committee recently that we now have a surplus for last year's budget. So I think we're trying to get on the right track. I mean, the state of Wisconsin also has a structural deficit. And I think, you know, that's something that we need to think about. When Representative Sanfilippo suggests that we're not running smoothly, I mean, we have elections. I was just on the ballot last April as well as the whole county board. And when he says things haven't changed, we had 25 supervisors, 19, and now 18. And when he cites the past pension scandal that happened prior that originated in the county executive's office, many people were recalled by citizens. There have been changes. I'm a brand new chairwoman. This is a new day at the county board, and just yesterday voters chose 2 additional county supervisors. That's 7 brand new county supervisors out of a board of 18. Many changes are already happening, and this county board and me as the leader of this board has been speaking very loudly and openly in the public about being receptive to reforms and them being done locally. The last thing I'd point out is when Representative Sanfilippo says, oh, you know, the people have spoken, they want change. Again, I think that they've spoken through elections. And I'd also like to remind you of a poll that this university helped conduct recently on the part-time or full-time status. And that poll recently said that there was a tie amongst Milwaukee County residents as to whether the board should be full or part-time. I personally think that suggests that this is something that should be decided locally.
Let me ask a question that seems very basic, and I'm sure for many people in this room who are very close to this issue, it is basic. But I think we should be on the record with the legislation, what it says at this moment in time. And can you just very briefly, in bullet points, tell us what the legislation says, how it changes responsibilities, oversight, but I mean very briefly, and then I would like to hear from the chairwoman about what specifically concerns her about what you're proposing.
Sure. When I was working with the drafter, writing the language on the bill, at one of our meetings he said to me, you know, you're really not making a whole lot of change here. And I said, exactly right. The vast majority of what this bill does is it just goes back and aligns the way Milwaukee County government operates to what the legislature intended it, the way the legislature intended it to operate when they created the role of county executive. Now, you take a look. We have 71 other counties in this state. We don't have these types of problems in these other 71 counties. But when you look at them, they follow the state statutes pretty much to the letter of the law, and things are running smoothly. In Milwaukee County, and again, this isn't, you know, you can't pin this on any particular board or the board, but over the course of time, Milwaukee County has kind of taken the approach that, well, the statute says this, but we can interpret it this way, so we can really do something on our own, and Milwaukee County has drifted away from that. So what this bill does is it says, listen, the county board is supposed to have all of the policy-making objectives in the county. My bill gives them that. The county board is supposed to do the budget writing. The single most important tool that any legislative body has, whether it's at the city, the county, the state, or the federal level, the budget is the single most powerful tool that they have. With that budget, with the power of that purse, you control everything. County board is in charge of the budget. Also, it says oversight. The county board should have oversight to make sure that its policies are being handled. My bill assures that the county board has oversight. In short, this bill gives the county board and the county executive all the authority and all the responsibilities that the state legislature intended it to have when they created the role of executive government back in 1960.
And it reduces salaries for supervisors from about 50 to about 24,000. That would be accurate.
That's
and
correct.
Limits the spending that county board can. Okay.
Yeah, and it's important to realize that, while, the level of salary has been talked about what it was back then versus now, but I think the difference is we know that the county board viewed itself as a part-time position and acted as a part-time board. I mean, last year we had an editorial from 4 former county supervisors that said that, hey, we were part-time. They operated in that fashion.
What concerns you most about what he's proposed? He says the county board is essentially still performing its core functions, its most important functions. What is it that bothers you about this legislation?
First of all, what bothers me is, I'm glad you asked those last questions, is the constant leaving out of the rest of the bill that I think is incredibly important. The first thing overall, I've stated it earlier, I just don't think that we need a bill in Madison for Milwaukee County, the largest county in the state of Wisconsin and the most diverse county in the state of Wisconsin, to tell us what our local government should look like. That's just number one. And I think that it's interesting that the representative says this is merely to bring us in line with other counties. I would argue that parts of the bill, for example, like the salary of the median household income, that is not used anywhere else, I believe, in the state of Wisconsin. Where has that model come from? I'd also ask, does that suggest, if you use that model, that elected officials who represent wealthier areas should be paid more? So is that a standard that we're now using? That's a question that I have. And I believe that line by line, it takes us out of sync with every other county in the state of Wisconsin. For example, what I would say is an arbitrary budget cut to the county board. It's the epitome of micromanaging. The state is coming in and micromanaging 0.5% of our local billion-dollar budget to dictate what staff should look like and resources to the legislative branch. We need the resources to be able to serve the people that we represent. And when you reduce the effectiveness and functionality of the county board and the elected representatives, you cut off the voice of the people. I also think, too, the last thing is that what this does to take us out of line is that essentially what this bill is creating is what could be one of the most powerful county executives in the state of Wisconsin. And in some areas, even have additional executive powers that even the governor doesn't have. Our county executive under this bill would have the authority to legislate, call certain meetings, and do many things that other executives are not able to do. And my last point, I do take it slightly personally when we keep suggesting there's all these problems in Milwaukee County. We are not the only local government that has an occasional disagreement with the executive branch. That's called democracy and checks and balances. It's not dysfunction and it's not problems. It's the democratic process.
Very briefly.
This bill isn't about disagreements between the executive and the board. This bill is about, last fall we had a county department head that said, I have 3 people doing a job in my department and I only need 2. The workload has gone down, I only need 2. County executive proposed a budget with 2 people in it. The county board said, I don't care, Mr. or Miss, in this case, department head, what you think. We want you to have 3 employees. You're taking that 3rd position. Now, this is where the problem comes in. We have department heads. We're paying them very good money. They're supposed to be running those departments. Why on earth did the county board say, we don't believe you, you're going to have to take this one person anyway? The taxpayers are wasting, $100,000 now between salary and benefits for this one position. This problem is emulated over and over and over again in county government. That's the problems that we're trying to fix here.
30-second rebuttal, and then we'll go back to Steve.
If this is such a good idea, and it's this great reform package, why isn't it being applied to every other county in the state of Wisconsin? That's a question that I have, and I think it needs to be answered. And I'd also ask for the representative to discuss a little bit about how something like this should be applied to its own state legislature? I mean, should we have a referendum on state legislator pay?
See?
The word that gets thrown around a lot lately has been dysfunctional when referring to the county government. You mentioned the Park East. I think that's a self-evident problem as far as the county government's role. But what are some of the other dysfunctional things about county government as you see it that are causing you to pursue this bill?
Sure. I think that take a look at the county psychiatric hospital. For 30 years, we've had reports saying that, you know what, you guys are running a bad program out there. This place needs to be fixed. You know, we had 6 deaths out there last year. Some of them are not out of the ordinary. Some of them are highly questionable. But yet the county board has refused to take action and enforce that some changes be done out there. Now, this is where the policy and the oversight comes in to make sure that we're providing the best service. So that's one area. Another area is, you know, when the county board has taken and trimmed all of county government, every aspect of county government has been downsized or trimmed. You know, back when that board was part-time in the 60s and 70s, they had over 11,000 county employees. We were running programs that we no longer run because the state had to come in and take them over. We were running them so poorly. So all of county government has shrunk, except when you get to the county board. The county board has gone to full-time. They've gone to 38 staff members. We spend $6.5 million running our county board, okay? We have some residents in one of our supervisors, Supervisor Johnson, for the last several years has been working trying to get a swimming pool open, Moody Pool, in his district, okay? We can bond and get the capital improvements done, but we can't come up with the money to operate the pool, to cover the operating expenses. So we have to make the decision. Do we need to spend $6.5 million running a county board to have 38 staff members, or should we take some of that money? For $6.5 million, we could run Moody Pool for almost 5 years for what we're spending on the board. And we have to be in the position to be able to make those tough choices. And we haven't seen the board willing to step up and make those types of choices yet.
And I would argue that is why we have elections. I think this bill is basically a slap in the face to the voters who elected us to make those decisions. If you don't like the decisions, we have elections and remedies to deal with that. I mean, you have a small, privileged group of people who are angry about some of the decisions that were made, and now are taking it to the state legislature and asking them to make changes that will have an impact for generations to come. I'd like to know, does that mean that there's no other executive and legislative disagreements throughout the state of Wisconsin? I mean, that's something that hasn't been answered. So just this blame game of all the bad things that have ever happened in county government, many of those people are not even here anymore. And when Representative Sanfilippo brings up the behavioral health system, last time I checked, that's a member of the county executive's cabinet that runs the day-to-day operations, which the board obviously supports that that's an executive function. But we need to have policy and oversight to make sure that things are moving forward as they should.
One of the concerns that's been raised about the bill is the provision on land sales or acquisitions. Maybe, Joe, you could just explain why that's in there and what that's intended to accomplish.
Sure. The bill sets the stage where the county board will not be able to insert itself in a negotiating process. And I think the easiest way for me to explain this is like this. If I want to sell my house, I go and contract with a real estate agent, and I say, Mr. or Miss Real Estate Agent, I want this much money for my house. These are the terms and conditions. This is what I want. Then the real estate agent goes and finds a buyer. I don't get involved with negotiating with that buyer. That's why I have the real estate agent. The real estate agent brings the deal back to me and says, yes, and I say, yes, I'll take it. No, I won't take it. That is exactly the powers that this bill gives the county board. The county board, through its policy-making roles, will, before a parcel could be sold, the county board has to declare it surplus. That's in county ordinance. In that process, the county board can set then all the terms and conditions. They can attach all the strings they want to attach. They can shape everything they want ahead of time. But what I'm saying now is at that point, the county board steps out. They're out of the process. You have an economic development director department They go, they find the buyers, they negotiate the deal. The county board, through county ordinance, can even dictate how that sale is going to take place. Is it an RFP? Is it an RFI? How are we going to advertise for the bid? Every aspect of that sale is dictated by the county board through county ordinance. But now the county board's out of the negotiating process. And again, put yourself in the shoes of this developer. Do you want to have to negotiate with 18 different people, and every time you think you've reached an agreement, somebody else comes in and wants to insert something else? We're taking that out of the process. At the end, the deal comes back to the county board, and the county board says yes or no. I'll take it or I'll leave it. Same thing that we do when we're selling our house. Very clean, very clear, simple process. That's exactly what this bill calls for.
And a change like that is something that could be proposed and implemented locally. That could be an ordinance change. I mean, I think we need to step back and ask, why can't we have this discussion locally and the changes made locally, as I believe that the people have spoken on? I mean, I'm willing. I meet with the county executive every other week on issues to go over things affecting Milwaukee County government. I'm willing to do what it takes, even if we need a mediator, what it takes to get this worked out locally. And this land sale initiative, I'd like to point that out as well, is when you make it more difficult for the county board as the legislative department to talk to department heads and get information. That's another part of the bill, where there's now an exclusive way how we deal with department heads in county government and how we communicate with them and speak with them. If we can't get good information and access, how can we make the right decisions on behalf of the people? And again, we're talking about public land being sold publicly. When you cut off our role in information and decision making, it also cuts off accountability and transparency. So the less that we're involved, I think it also has the public being involved much less.
I'd like to ask this question of the chairwoman. Representative Sanfilippo says the board will not do reform on its own. Mm-hmm. Why hasn't the board done reform? Or do you believe reform is not necessary for the board at this moment in its history?
Oh, I believe reform is necessary.
What does it look like?
Sure. And we're working on that. I mean, so again, his plan is quite arbitrary. I still haven't heard where the 0.4% cap has come from, who uses a median income household for payment, or compensation, I should say. But what we want to do locally is gather information, as we've had 4 or 5 town hall meetings. We have one tonight, and hear from our residents what they'd like to see. We believe that once we have that information, and we've also ordered an independent audit to get additional information to see what other places are doing around the state, we will put that together into a package, and then that's how we'll be able to reform our government locally. Will it, some have asked me, oh, well, will the board do it to themselves? Will they include it? Of course. We just adopted a resolution at our last county board meeting asking the state for a tool to downsize the board, because we just went through redistricting only 2 years ago. So we're moving in that direction. But when you say that no one in the past has ever done it, again, the board has changed. 25 to 19 to 18 supervisors. I haven't even been chairwoman for a year yet. We're still regrouping. We just got new supervisors. We want to get all the information possible and put that into a local reform package.
So do you think that what's happened in the past, for example, if you go back a couple of years where reform efforts were undertaken by certain members of the board, Representative Sanfilippo among them, and pretty much did not go anywhere, do you think that that's not a predictor of the future?
Well, first of all, while Representative Sanfilippo was on the board, I mean, he did for 5 years take full-time pay and full-time compensation while he was on the board with us. And he did promote many reform efforts, and there's still many people on the board that are also proposing reform. I mean, I get the feeling like there's only one type of reform. And because we didn't agree with all of his ideas when he was on the board, now he has to go to the state and take those same ideas there. There's many different ways to reform. There's not just one way. So I'm sorry that at that point with that concept and that time, the majority of the board didn't agree with him. But I think there's different ways to reform. It's not just all one way. And I'd also argue that the only reform in county government is not just the county board. We're one part of the entire government. There's other parts of government like mental health, transit, or park services, and the executive branch as well.
She's saying the board has changed. She's saying, I've been chair for 1 year. Give me a chance. Why are you skeptical of that?
I think, as I mentioned before, we have the Legislative Audit Bureau report that came out in 2002. I mean, when you read that thing, it's kind of like Back to the Future. all of the problems that are highlighted in that report exist today. It talks about micromanaging the government. It talks about the issues with how we approve contracts. So you read the thing and you're saying, wow, that report came out in 2002. Nothing really much has changed. The board did downsize, went from 25 down to 19. But in that report, they also talked about, they talked about downsizing. They also talked about back to part-time, and they devoted a whole section to say, yeah, maybe we should consider going back to part-time. That report even mentions that in 2003, the county executive was talking about proposing a $15,000 cap on supervisor pay and putting it back to part-time. So, okay, we've spent the last 10 years to see what board reform was going to look like. They downsized from 25 now to 18 with last year. We still have all the same problems in place. So what that tells me is, you know what? That downsizing didn't fix it. That didn't do it. So now let's take another kick at the can and let's do it right this time. And I say go back to part-time. We have the perfect model to see that part-time worked before. And as far as you talk about, willing to change now in the resolution that was just recently passed, we had board members stand up on the board floor and say, I'm voting for this resolution and let's ask the state if we can downsize on our own, but I'm never going to vote for a downsizing on my own. I mean, you could almost feel the old wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, we're going to do it. Just trust us this time. We have had the plenty of opportunity for the board to do this, and the board just hasn't done it. So it's a huge leap of faith for us to think that all of a sudden now, after more than a decade of the state telling us to reform, we've seen reports from the Public Policy Forum and other organizations, they all say the same thing. I mean, it's time for a lot less talk, or a little more lot less talk and a little more action, or vice versa, however Toby Keith says it. But, and that's really where we're at right now. And again, the county is an arm of the state. If we were talking about any other city or village, they've got home rule, their protection, we're not stepping in. But this is state government. The county government is defined as the local face of state government. If we don't step in and fix it, who's going to do it? It's obvious they're not going to do it on their own. So who would do it?
Joe, I wonder if we could back up for a second to a point Marina made earlier. Why hasn't the legislature held a public hearing in Milwaukee County since this bill is about Milwaukee County?
We're going to have the best public hearing at all, and that's going to be the referendum. The voters are going to have the opportunity to vote in the referendum to say if we want to change. Now, when you're talking about changing the state statutes, clarifying them, fixing them, those are state statute issues. I mean, who else is going to be able to change those statutes? In the end, this bill isn't creating anything new. It's not giving the county executive more power than he should have or more power than he even has right now. It's not taking anything away from the board that the board is not supposed to have. It's aligning the powers and putting it as the way the legislature intended it to be created back when they created this position.
But what's the downside to the legislature receiving public impact in a public forum about what people fear or they're worried about or that they like about the bill?
Well, there really isn't a problem. I mean, wherever, other than a logistical standpoint, when you try to get a lot of legislators to move to different positions, for example, when we have committee meetings up in the Capitol, I mean, we may have to leave to go have other meetings in our office. People are on two different committee meetings at once. I mean, next week, Wednesday, for example, I have two bills going in front of two different committees, and I have another committee meeting. So, I mean, I have to try to juggle all of that in with everything that I'm doing. So the fact to have a centralized location where you're doing some of this, I think helps from a logistical standpoint. But again, we know the people have already had the opportunity to speak in the binding referendum last year. They would have all had that opportunity if the board wouldn't have denied it to them. And so, we're going to give them the opportunity to vote in the referendum.
No, I definitely cannot agree with that. In fact, I sent a letter to the Assembly asking if we could have a hearing in Milwaukee County, and we were denied that opportunity. The referendum, again, only has one question on it. It doesn't have the rest of the bill on it. It only asks about the compensation, if it should be to that of a median income household salary. And I just don't think that one referendum question is the equivalent of a Milwaukee County public hearing. I'm not convinced. I mean, it's disappointing to me that you wouldn't want to have a hearing in Milwaukee County and to argue that the committees can't move. I just drove here from the Greendale High School where Joint Finance, which is a very large committee, was here in Greendale listening to the residents of Milwaukee County. I would think that a bill that only deals with Milwaukee County, those supporting it, would at least allow a hearing in Milwaukee County. And I'd like to point out that one of Representative Sanfilippo's co-sponsors on the bill has already made that request, State Senator Lena Taylor. I mean, we need to have a hearing here in Milwaukee County. It's unacceptable.
You both obviously served on the county board for some time, and since one of the key provisions in this bill talks about the compensation for supervisors, I'd like to ask each of you how much time you think it takes a supervisor to do his or her job well.
Well, I think, of course, the representative was a supervisor for 5 years, and I've been doing it for 8 years. I think we need to look back to the elections. When we are elected and put our name on a ballot and run a very difficult campaign and go door to door, when it's bestowed upon you the honor and privilege to serve those people, that comes with a full-time responsibility. It's full-time, around the clock, being on service to all the services that are in Milwaukee County. There's no shortage of need, from mental health to human services to transit and parks. So I would say it's definitely a full-time responsibility. And I would also ask, and I hope that the representative will speak to this, about the state legislature. I mean, there's nowhere in the state statutes that says the Milwaukee County Board is part-time or full-time. And I think the state legislature, I know that it's one of the few in the United States that is perhaps a full-time legislature. And again, I've asked the question, is the representative willing to look at a referendum on their pay? And I think that's an important question, because this has shed the light on that whole argument.
My experience from being on the board the last 5 years tells me that there is in no way, shape, or form is this a full-time job that you have to be in that courthouse 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. When you meet with your constituents, 9 times out of 10, I met with my constituents in the evening and on weekends. When I went and conducted district business, it was in the evening, it was on weekends. Other than having those committee meetings and those board meetings during the daytime, you don't have to really be in that courthouse to conduct your job. So it's hard to say from one supervisor to another what exactly is that workload going to be. But again, we have to just take a look at the past. And we are not creating or inventing something brand new. We had a part-time county board for the first 15 to 20 years under the county executive form of government. Every county board in this state is part-time right now. I mean, there isn't all sorts of calamity happening there. Other than the city of Milwaukee, every village and city has a part-time board. And so, again, if we look back when we had a part-time board in the 60s and 70s, they had more employees to watch over, they had more programs to watch over, they had more facilities to watch over, they constructed the zoo, they built the county regional medical complex, they were running a power plant, we were running a hospital. We're not doing any of those things today. The state came in and took over the AFDC and child welfare back in 1998, okay? They didn't have a public hearing to say, oh, we got to come in and fix this problem. They came in and said, there's a problem, we need to fix it. That program's gone. A couple of years ago, the state came in and took over our income maintenance services because we weren't running that program very well. So the state has had to step in and fix problems unique to Milwaukee County in the past. Last year, they created a separately elected comptroller position so that we knew we were getting good information. The state has stepped in to fix problems in the past. This is just an example of the state stepping in once again to fix another problem unique to Milwaukee County. That's why this legislation deals strictly with Milwaukee County. My bill is not a solution in search of a problem. My bill is here to address a specific problem which we're seeing in Milwaukee County, and that's what we're going to do.
We're going to take audience questions in a minute, so let me end with a quick question from each of you. And I'll have you respond to his argument, his fundamental argument here is that we have municipal governments providing a lot of services. County government is downsized from where it was back 2 decades ago. Why shouldn't the board reflect those realities?
Well, I think the board is very reflective of the community that we serve. We are, again, the most diverse county in the state of Wisconsin. And while you want to compare us to other counties with their size and their needs and other municipal governments, We serve 1 million people, and we're the board of directors of a $1 billion budget. We have many more services and many more people that we need to represent with perhaps at times many more needs. And I think that's a full-time responsibility. The other point, too, is in his bill, in the referendum, it doesn't even ask if we should be part-time. It's only focused on the compensation. And again, where did that model come from? The median household income. And I would like to argue once again, is that saying that when the median income household, when the household income is higher in wealthier areas, does that mean those elected officials should be paid more in those areas? I think it's an interesting trend that may be beginning. And again, this is something that's decided locally. If we are on the ballot every 4 years, and if the voters choose to have a different form of government, there were many candidates who ran on this issue, on a part-time board issue versus a candidate who wanted to do it full-time. So again, I think this is something that can be handled locally.
My final question is, do you think you have a public perception problem on this issue? And I asked that Dan Bice, Steve's colleague, wrote a story this week that talked about people, lobbyists representing the Greater Milwaukee Committee involved in consulting on this bill. She's used the term a small privileged group of people in her description of some of the impetus for this bill. Do you have a public perception problem?
I don't. And I think you have to remember, the last 3 months I spent crafting the bill. And so up until just a few weeks ago when the actual bill came out, all we had was speculation. What's going to be in it? What's it going to look like? Okay? I have never, ever taken the it's my way or the highway approach to anything. Well, my kids may disagree with that on a few occasions, but when it comes to governing, I like to be inclusive. I went to several different groups. I talked to dozens of people as I was getting input on how this bill was going to look. This is my bill. Nobody wrote this bill but me. I took advice from a whole array of different organizations, different people. One nice thing about being in the legislature is, I have former county board chairmen, former county executives have been there. I have former, county board members. I find out, how are things working in your county? What works, what doesn't work? And so the fact that, is there a perception problem? No, because everybody's just been, I think there's this knee-jerk reaction to, there's change coming, automatically we don't like it. And now that I'm able to actually spend time describing what's actually in the bill as opposed to all these rumors of what it does or what it doesn't do, I think that we'll be able to get the message out that, this bill is really nothing more than just putting in place what the legislature intended the government to look like here in Milwaukee County, and really the way it operates in every other county in the state.
Yep, briefly.
Okay, I just wanted to say it's not perception, it's reality. In the article, it mentioned that there was a direct affiliation with that group in drafting the legislation.
Let's take some audience questions. I'm going to spin around here. Raise your hand. Please, let's not have speeches. Maybe we can just have questions. So we'll begin there. Yes.
I can see you have strong convictions, but I think you're nibbling around the edge. I think the fundamental question is, do we really need to have a county government at all? You can make a good argument for regional government here. And one of the arguments against that is, well, then you've got one more layer of government. And maybe really both sides need to get back and rethink what's the real function of a county government here. It made sense 100 years ago. I'm not sure it does today.
Quick response from each of you to that point.
If the question is, do we need county government? I believe we do, and we're an arm of the state. Again, large amount of services are being dealt with here in Milwaukee County. I think what you're getting at is, could we move to more consolidation and shared services? And I would actually argue that the bill the representative is sponsoring makes it even more difficult to consolidate services in the future, in that now we would have to go to an additional subunit kind of extra body of government, the ICC, Intergovernmental Cooperation Council, to get those types of consolidation efforts enacted, whereas now we can just work within county government to do the consolidation and shared services, much like we did with the city of Milwaukee on the 911 services.
I think to answer your question, I believe that there's a very important role for the county board to play. And we can take a look at, there's some of the services that the county has to provide. They're state-mandated services. The county has to provide them. It would be very difficult for a local municipality to try to take them on. The courts, the jails, things like that. But the problem really here is not, do we need county government, we don't need county government. Our problem is that our county board really is not functioning in its role the way it was intended to be. I mean, the chairwoman mentioned before, we're the director of a $1 billion corporation. That's true. But the key is we're the directors. We're not the administrators. We're not running those departments. We're not running those day-to-day services. We're just the directors, and we need to just fall back and operate more in that position.
Let's take another question. I saw somebody with their hand up earlier. Yes, please, stand.
I think this bill's a Trojan horse. There's all kinds of stuff hidden in it that's not included in the talking points that sound good to some of the people who may generally favor reform. The ICC provision that Chairwoman just mentioned is one of those. But I'd like to ask a specific question. Some of the language in the bill applies to counties with a population of 750,000 or more. That's obviously just Milwaukee County. But there's other language in the bill that applies to counties with a population of 500,000 or more. The population of Dane County is very close to 500,000. So should Dane County residents be concerned about this bill? Is this just an oversight? Is it deliberate? This kind of thing raises questions.
Thanks for the question.
Sure. When I embarked on this endeavor, one of my instructions to the drafter was to every place in the ordinance, wherever it uses the number 500,000, change it to 750. And that's to reflect Dane County's population growth, because this bill is it's only for Milwaukee County. Well, what the drafter came back and told me is there's so many different references all throughout the entire state code where it refers back to county statutes that I literally would have had a 500-page bill just to make that one change from 750 to 500. So we didn't make the change. Now, in fact, just yesterday, as a matter of fact, I met with a representative from Dane County. We talked about this issue, so we consulted with the drafter, and what we decided we could do is every 500,000 number just in this bill as it's written, we're going to do an amendment next week to change that to 750,000, just so that, there's no ambiguity there. Everybody is clear. This bill is strictly for Milwaukee County, not for Dane County.
Just very quickly, I think you see some of the bumps in the road and why when you try to basically craft a whole new way of governing local government, there's hiccups in the road. That's why I would argue that it's the epitome of micromanaging. It's difficult. That's why we have to keep going back and making changes, and there's been many changes because it's best of the local government. That's the model that works in Wisconsin. It's not the Sanfilippo reform plan. It's what people have chosen locally.
Let's take other questions. Yes, right there.
On needing reform. I think everybody agrees with that. And not only reform on the board itself and their role and the budget, outside of spending more and more money on consultants and studies and things like that, what are some very specific things you as the chairwoman can propose to really streamline the board, their role, and the budget, and get rid of some of the waste that is obviously apparent that is in the county government? Okay.
Yes, as chairwoman, I am the leader of our legislative branch, and I run our department and then our staff that reports to us. So I've already made many efficiency measures within our own department, and I'm open to many, many more. And that's something I believe that we can do locally. We've been getting information from people. Yes, you mentioned we'll have a study, but can we make reductions within our own budget? Of course we can. We've already done some of that. We've combined a committee, and we're changing things electronically, and I believe that we can achieve not the exact number of savings that's being mandated on us and no other county government in the state of Wisconsin, but significant savings that can come from within the department. I just don't think that the state has a role in mandating a local budget. We are 0.5% of the entire county budget. And I think we need a representative branch of government to come together and find larger policy issues throughout the county to even produce more taxpayer savings. So we're willing to do that. I said I'm even willing to sit down with a mediator if that's what it takes to get this done between the county executive and the legislative branch. That's what we do through our 4 or 5 month budget process. I don't know why we need the state to basically force that down our throats at a number that they think is correct, again, when they have a very large legislative staff themselves at the state.
Let's take another question here. Sure.
For Representative Sanfilippo, I'm just curious, have you got any kind of pushback from your colleagues most of whom may be just their role as a county or a state legislator would be their sole source of income, that they're afraid that maybe what comes around, goes around may come around?
I haven't.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
What's your response when people say, why shouldn't we look at this for state lawmakers? Why shouldn't we go back to the citizen legislator?
Sure. If anybody wants to compare the roles, the responsibilities, the job duties of a state legislator versus a county supervisor, that's a discussion and a comparison I am extremely eager to have because I've done both positions. But that should not be used as a smokescreen to cover the issue at hand, which is we need to reform Milwaukee County government. The county board has refused to do so for more than a decade. So that's a worthy discussion. Let's have it on its own merits. Let's not use it just to cloud this issue here.
May I just say, it's not a smokescreen, it's a mirror in that the district that Representative Sanfilippo represents mirrors the same number of people that a county supervisor represents, around 50,000 people.
Let's take another couple questions. Yeah, Maria.
We live in an era where we are very well prepared. We have researched, we have compared, we have in fact studied this current issue more than the Ten Commandments. Don't you think that it's right to give we residents the opportunity to actually voice our opinion on how we want to be governed?
I think that is incredibly important. I think that's why we were all on the ballot last April, and I think the question that's being mandated through a binding referendum asks, what should your representatives be paid a median household income? It doesn't recraft all of county government, and the rest of the reforms that the representative is suggesting is not even on the ballot. I mean, the high consolidation of power into the county executive's office is not on the ballot. And I still ask, who asked for that? I'm still wondering when someone will answer that question. Who asked for all those other changes? It surely wasn't the voters. It wasn't the hundreds of people who came to our town hall meetings. Whose wish list is that?
You have a brief response.
You're right. The county residents deserve the opportunity to have this referendum to weigh in and have their voices heard. I mean, and that's what we're doing here. And I find it ironic that the same board members now who are saying, oh, you've got to have a public hearing here in Milwaukee County and the state's doing such an awful job if you don't, those are the same people that worked against me last year when I wanted to have this non-binding referendum. It would have been a non-binding referendum, a perfect way to put our thumb in the air, engage, how the winds are blowing, and the county board worked very hard to prevent every citizen in this county from having that opportunity. Thanks to this bill, they will have that opportunity now.
He didn't like the decision, and he's changing the decision makers.
We've got time for about one or two more questions.
Decision makers are the residents.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to know, did you vote for or against the non-binding referendum allowing people to either voice their opinion or not voice their opinion on this issue a year ago?
I guess it's directed for me, the Supervisor Sanfilippo.
Which would allow the voters to voice their opinion on this issue a year ago.
Right. I did not support that. The majority of the board did not support that initiative. Perhaps if we would have worked a little bit harder and had a different type of language, maybe we could have got that done. I was also not the chairwoman at that time.
Other questions? We're going to try and get to as many as we can. Yes, sir.
I think it's important to look at the amount of referendums Milwaukee County has actually had. In 2008, voters voted for, in a majority, for a sales tax that would support transit and cultural entities in the county. Do you believe, since referendums aren't supposed to just pay lip service, that we should support that too at the state level?
I'm assuming you're talking to me? Well, I wasn't in favor of that issue. That was about a county-wide sales tax increase. I wasn't in favor of that issue. So it's hard for me to say, oh, should that have been put into effect right away? But nonetheless, again, the difference here is that was an advisory referendum. This would be a binding referendum. So the citizens are actually going to have the power that their vote is really going to be enacted. So that kind of concern that, well, we're just going to do another referendum that isn't going to mean anything, that's out the table here. This referendum will stand for something.
I would just like to add, if the referendum that the representative is proposing is failed, if it fails and is rejected by the voters, everything else in the bill still stands, which is a major change to county government. And I still haven't heard what happens if the voters reject that referendum next year. There's still going to be significant changes to county government, and I don't think that his bill addresses that.
What happens? Can you respond to that?
Well, really, the only thing that would change is the fact that we have the cap on the board budget, the amount the board can spend. And so what we're saying is the overall cost to run the department of the county board is way out of whack. I mean, we spend $6.5 million to run the Milwaukee County Board. Dane County has twice as many supervisors as us. There's 38 supervisors on Dane County. They spend less than $1 million on their board operation. So the board is going to have to, just like in all of our lives, if our pay gets cut or if we own a business and we lose some contracts, we have to learn to live within our means. The board's going to have to learn to live within that budgetary cap. In other words, they will have to start actually working a full-time job and replace some of the staff members and do some of the work on their own. If you're going to be in a full-time position, you get compensated for a full-time position, then you should be productive at it, and you should have a workload that matches that level of compensation.
Anything you'd like to add? You got 20 seconds.
Just that sounds like micromanaging from the state into the local government.
We're going to have to wrap things up. I know there are a million questions. We try to keep these things on time, and 1:15 is our time of departure, as they say. I would like to thank Chairwoman Dmitrievich, Representative Sanfilippo, and, of course, Steve Jagler and Steve Schultz.
Thank you.
Thank you.